if they like the session, so please give me likes. And if you have any queries regarding the session, please feel free to ask your questions in the comment box mentioned below. I will try my level best to give answers to your queries during the session, and if not, it would be possible for me. I would try my level best to give the answers to your queries, the participants who will be left after the session. So now, let's start our training session on listening skills. So before going further to the listening skills, let us understand the overall scenario of the communication skills in which listening skills has some part. That means in the communication skills, we also do speaking, we also do writing, we also do reading, and we also do listening. That's our session for today actually. So let us understand what is the percentile of all these sections. That means what is a part of speaking in the communication, how much it consists for listening, how much it consists for reading, and how much it consists for writing. So for speaking, for example, there is a particular psychologist, Wilt. In 1950, he studied regarding this particular aspect, that how much percentile we can give to speaking, to writing, to reading, and to listening. So let us understand according to the language of Wilt. So he said that writing comprises of 9% of the part. That means the communication that we do. So writing consists of the 9% part. After that, reading. Reading, it comprises of 16% of part. Now after the reading, speaking, he says that speaking consists of 30% of the part. But when it comes to the part of listening in the all communication share, he says that at least 45% consists of listening. So it's a big thing which requires lots of focus and concentration, that we need to focus on listening. Now going further, there is again a study did by Rankin in 1928. He's again a very good psychologist. So he said that people spend 70% of their waking time when they are communicating. They spend 3/4 of the time in speaking as well as in listening. That means 3/4. In the one, 3/4 is only for speaking and for listening. And now this is the big concern. So before going deeper into the meaning of the listening skills, that what actually listening is all about, let's understand the difference between two major things. That means hearing and listening. Yes, I said hearing and listening. So what actually hearing is all about and what actually listening is all about, it means that something is different in hearing and listening. So if I talk about hearing, what actually hearing is all about, it is just a sense that allows you to perceive sound. It is only a physical act, that means which involves only the reception of sound waves. For example, when we go to the market, right now in these days, I know it's lockdown, but in the normal days, when we go to the market and we are just going for some work, for example, I'm going to buy some pen in a stationery shop, but suddenly I hear a particular sound which is coming from another shop. A famous singer, for example, Mr. Gurdas Maan, he's singing a Punjabi song, and I'm listening to that particular Punjabi song, but I'm not listening actually. I just heard a particular sound. That means my ears were doing the work, but I was not listening, I was just hearing. So that was only the physical act. So in the deeper, if I talk about hearing, it means that it's simply the act of perceiving sound by the ear. And if you are not hearing impaired, if you do not have any problems with your ears, so hearing simply happens. So now, just take an example. Lots of times when we go around, lots of times हम जब किसी के भी साथ जाते हैं, for example किसी restaurant में बैठे होते हैं, हमारा focus is on eating food, is on giving orders. But there is a particular music which is going on in the background in a particular restaurant. Sometimes we hear it. It's a physical act. The reception of sound will come in our ears, but it doesn't mean that we are listening that particular sound. We are listening to that particular song. We are just simply hearing, and that is the physical act. So now, the second thing, that is listening. Now let us see what listening is all about. So the Oxford University, the people of Oxford University, they simply said that if listening is being concerned, so say that to listen is to give attention. That means to sound as well as on the action. So when listening, one is hearing what you are saying and trying to understand what it means. That means if I'm sitting in a particular restaurant and the song is coming in my ears, when I started understanding that particular song, it becomes listening. So what does it involve in this particular process? Because the process is very big for the listening. It involves the act of listening, complex affective, cognitive, and the behavior processes. So now let us understand what does mean by complex affective in the process of listening when I'm trying to understand something as well as I'm hearing also. So in this complex affective, it involves the motivation to listener to others. That means that particular power of motivation to listen to others is involved in this complex affective. Now, after that, cognitive process is also involved in listening. It includes attending to, understanding to, receiving and interpreting the content and relational messages, which is a very big thing. All the cognitive process involves in the process of listening. Now, after that, it involves behavioral processes. Now, it includes responding to others with verbal and non-verbal feedback. So, hi, good morning, everybody. I'm very happy that you are joining here. Thank you, Netru Pawarji. Thank you, Pratik Suja. Thank you, Bhaswati Bhattacharya ji. Very good morning to you all. So, now, listening is differs from obeying. That means that a person who receives sound understands information for an instruction. That means he chooses not to comply with or not to agree with it. So has listened to the speaker, even though the result is not what the speaker wanted. So that means listening is quite different from obeying. Because when you are listening, you are understanding. But it doesn't mean that your boss is saying something to you. It depends on you. You have to obey it or not. Of course, you have to obey it. So let's take another example of a teacher and a student. So it's simply things that when a particular instructor is saying something to the student, if he is listening, it doesn't mean that he is obeying that particular thing of the instructor. Now let's go further. If I just conclude regarding the listening and the hearing, I can simply say that hearing is a phenomenon impact. That means it's just a physiological phenomena, hearing. But if we're just concerned about the listening, it's simply a psychological act. Yes, Abhijit Bharaskar ji, good morning. Good morning, Ansari Fahad. Good morning, Partha Basu. Yes, that is the thing that you are asking Raju over here, the participant. The hearing and the listening, that means hearing, Raju, is simply a physical act where when something is getting in your ears, you are perceiving that particular sound. It simply means hearing. You're not understanding, you're not focusing onto that. But when you're starting understanding onto that particular part, it becomes listening. So now just going deeper into this particular hearing and listening, I want to just focus on listening. So listening is simply means that there are two styles. That means the first style I can say that passive listening, and the another side is active listening. Now what does passive listening involves? Passive listening, when a person is practicing passive listening, he is sitting quietly without responding to what the speaker is saying. Simply, when you, for example, listen to music or a podcast, or even, when you are listening to the news, for example, right now in these days, in this COVID period, we listen a lot of news. Sometimes on radio, sometimes on FM, sometimes we are directly watching and listening that particular news on television. So whatever the broadcasting media is all about. So in the particular passive listening, sometimes we require a few open-ended replies to keep the speaker focused or talking. For example, this particular technique, for if I consider about passive listening, it simply requires that listening to a lecture in school or watching a movie, Both require passive listening, as I talked earlier, and the technique can improve your communication skills, your ability to clearly understand the things, as well as the information being presented to you. For example, when instructor is giving you some kind of a listening, some kind of a instruction, and there, when you are understanding the things, it becomes the complete listening. It involves passive listening as well as the second type of style of listening that I'm talking about, that is active listening. Now, what does active listening actually involves? So now let's see. It's a technique that is used in counseling. I can say that in training, in solving disputes or conflicts, as well as it requires that the listener fully concentrate the thing and understand as well as respond and then remember what is being said. Let's take an example of customer service report. There is a particular customer service support in our Safe Express Private Limited, that is Safe Experience. So when a particular customer calls to a toll-free number, so the person who is sitting on the inbound process, he needs to have these two skills, passive listening as well as active listening. Now, when the customer says his queries, he hears the queries, he understands the queries fully, he gives concentration to whatever the particular customer is saying to our customer support executive. You respond and remember that is being said. For example, whatever the customer is saying to the customer care executive, he also feeds the information into the database. You respond back with that particular 100% right reply to. So this is something about active listening. Now, after understanding the hearing and listening and the styles of listening, that is passive listening and the active listening, now let's focus on what are the levels of listening. I mean, there are some levels of listening. So we have distributed all these levels of listening with the help of a ladder. For example, there are 5 steps of listening. So the first ladder, it's a very generic view that right now I'm talking about. That is, sometimes the first ladder is complete ignorance. Yes, I said complete ignorance. Just take an example. We listen so many things, but sometimes with complete ignorance. Let's say, take an example of an instructor and a student. There is a classroom. Some students are listening to a teacher. They are listening to that particular instructor. But some students, they don't take care of whatever the instructor is saying. They are completely giving ignorance to that particular listening part. So that is the first ladder, complete ignorance. Now the second high level of listening, it becomes pretending you are listening. Again, I'm just taking an example of a classroom. Just take an example where there are some backbenchers. I mean, the students who are sitting at the back of the class, and they are pretending to listening, but actually they are not listening at all. But some students are listening. So the second ladder, the higher level of listening, the second ladder is pretending to listening. Now, after the pretending to listening, that becomes selective listening. So here the listener is actually listening to the selected part of the conversation. Again, I'm taking an example of customer support executive and a customer. The conversation is going on between these two people. Now here, the customer support executive is trying to explain everything about the product and services that the company offers. Let's say an example of insurance sector. Suppose I want to buy an insurance, and as one of the customer care executive of a particular XYZ company has called me to purchase insurance. He's selling insurance, but I want a very good insurance that includes health insurance as well as the life insurance, and what would be the premium. So the things that would be in my mind, I will only concentrate onto that particular things. That means the selected part of the conversation between me and that customer care executive will play a part in the selective listening. So we do. Just take an example of your examples. I mean, your real life examples at home also. When our parents are saying something to us, the thing that is a selective part of our conversation, we only focus onto that. and rest of the part we just remove. So it's a natural thing. So now after the third letter of selective listening, it comes attentive or active listening. That I have already talked about, that this is a technique that is used in counseling, in training, in solving the disputes or the conflicts, as well as it requires the listener to fully concentrate, understand, respond, and then remember what is being said. As I took an example of customer care executive in the attentive as well as in the active listening part, where he is understanding, fully concentrating on that particular dialogues. So dialogues, dia means two, and logs, that particular thing, communication which is going on. That means dialogue means among the two people. So now here in the active as well as in the attentive listening, the particular person, customer care executive, is absolutely listening, he is concentrating, he is focusing, responding back, and whatever the things was important, he is also noting it into the database. So that means attentive or active listening. And after the fourth letter, there comes the highest level, that means the fifth level of listening. That means empathetic listening. Now what does that mean? It means listening with the intent to understand and others. So real customer care executive is actually follows the empathetic listening. And the customer care executive, or in any other professions like public administration, in the public dealing in banks, whosoever is following empathetic listening is actually listening properly, because he is there having an intent to understand others. So this is very important. Yes, Parul, you're right. You are asking the exact question, that we always follow the empathetic listening in the professions like teaching, in the professions, absolutely, in the professions like customer care executive, as we talked, yes, in the professions like in the hospital industry, hospitality industry, absolutely, Parul, you're absolutely right. So these are the types of listening, the levels of listening, and the highest level is empathetic listening. But after understanding all these levels, whatever we have talked about, whatever we are discussing, there are some barriers to listening also. And these barriers should be, not ignored, but these barriers should be solved. So let us understand the first barrier which can come into the listening part. We are the first letter, that means we are always anxious to ask questions. That is the first barrier in listening. Again, let's move to the example of customer care executive and a customer. Customer care executive is trying his 100% to make you sure about the products and services he is selling to you. For example, I require an RO system at my house, and the customer care executive is explaining me very well the features, the product features, the services they will offer for the RO system. But I'm asking questions again and again to the customer care executive. So suppose he is explaining me well, and I'm asking questions, round and round questions, the bombardment of the questions. I'm anxious to ask questions to him. Then that particular thing would be a very big barrier to the listening process. There I would not be able to understand the exact features of the product and services. Yes, Abbas, you are absolutely right. Ignorance, pretending, selective, active, and empathetic listening is great. Thank you very much, Abbas. So now, after that, the big barrier when you are interrupted. Now, interruption, it can happen, by any other means. So when you are interrupted, the things that you were listening, interruption can happen. Suppose, let's take an example, when we are talking somebody over telephone. So interruption can occur due to the network issue. Interruption can occur not only due to the network issue. There can be some technical glitch over the landline that can become a major interruption, major barrier to this particular listening skill. So these are some technical glitches also that can become a barrier to the listening as well as. So now let's jump to the third barrier of listening, which is really very important, that when you are not open-minded. I mean, sometimes, we have this particular habit that we are not open-minded. That means we are not ready to listen. It happens to everybody. Now it depends upon the communication that is being going on between two people, the links between two people, because this is an attitudinal barrier. It's in actually in our attitude. When something is wrong, so majorly it can be possible that there is something wrong in our attitude also. So this is an attitudinal barrier. I'm not open minded, for example. You are not open minded. Anybody is not open minded. They are not ready to listen. Then the intent of that particular communication cannot be completed. So we have to be open minded when we are listening to somebody, because that particular statement, that information can be very fruitful, and as well as it can be very useful for us. Now, after that, when you are, you know, for example, my opinion is self made. If you are explaining me something, if you are telling me something, but I have made my opinion self made, that means I have a narrow minded approach. And there are some people in the organizations also, they have made the opinion for a particular speaker, so they are not trying to listen to that particular speaker, because already they have made the opinion that this particular conversation is not a very fruitful for me, it's just a wastage of time, wastage of energy. So when we have this particular attitude that we have, made a self-made opinion, the intent of that particular conversation, which can be a very important communication in your organizations, in your colleges, in your universities, in your classrooms, the intent of that particular communication then will not be made. It will be, it will go into the vein. So never make that particular opinion that has been made self-made. Now this opinion can be made by a particular person due to so many reasons. For example, age can be a factor. Yes, Partha Basu, should we ask any question when we are listening? Well, definitely, Partha Basu, you can ask the question, but you need to wait for your time. Let that particular speaker complete the conversation, let you understand 100%, and after that, of course, in the communication skills, probing is required, asking questioning is absolutely required, but you need to wait for a particular time. When the conversation gets over, then wait for your turn and then just ask question. I hope I have given answer to you. Thank you. Now let me just go further. Now after that, thus again the barrier of the listening skills is close to new ideas and situations. So now again, there are some people in the organizations who have, made their mentality when they are close to new ideas and situations. In the companies right now, in these days, lots of innovations are going on, and there are some people who are into the age of 40s, 50s. They are at the very higher positions. Some of them are really open to ideas, open to new ideas, but few of them, it might be possible due to the age factor, due to their own narrow-minded mentality, they are not open to new ideas, and they are just close to new ideas and any particular situation. So it can be a big barrier to the listening. So now, after that, the next barrier is preconceived notion. That means sometimes we tend to ignore what others are saying. We have this particular mentality, we have made this mentality because in our mentality it comes that I need to speak, I need to ask, I don't have to listen. So that is a preconceived notion that some people they have adopted in their mind. So it can be a very major disaster as well as a barrier to the listening part. So now, to overcome for these all particular barriers, we should not get anxious to ask so many questions. We need to try to understand and listen to the entire concept, whatever is going on right now. The second thing, we can overcome that particular barrier when you are interrupted. Please, for example, suppose I'm just talking with you over the telephone. When I got interrupted, I should text you again that please can we start the conversation again, so that the intent of the conversation can get clearer and the listening objective also get clearer. Now the another thing that I can overcome the barrier, that is be open minded. Try to listen what the other people are saying. It can be really helpful to you. And to be very honest and to be very frank with you, the day when I adopted this particular habit, the positivity has started coming in my mind and in my work. Now, after that, don't have self-made opinion. this can be a very disaster for us. Suppose, for example, the person who is, sitting in front of me, he's saying me something, and I have to listen, but I have made a very, self-made opinion for that particular speaker, then it can be a major barrier for, listening. So don't make this self-made opinion. Overcome by this particular factor. Try to overcome from it. Now, after that, do not close to new ideas and situations. In this particular era, that's the era, for example, of lots of innovations which are going on right now in these days. So we have to be open for new ideas and situations. We have to open for new technologies. So try to have this particular thing in your mind. Now, don't get preconceived notions. That means don't ignore somebody to listen. This is again a very major disaster for listening process. So please overcome from this particular factor, that always try to listen others. So now, to conclude the entire gist of this particular session that we have covered so far, yes, Shrikant Bharti, good listener is always a good learner. Absolutely. Of course. Thank you, Shrikant. So now, after that, to conclude the entire gist of the session that we have covered so far, to sum up, I would just like to say that the subtopics that I have covered, because so many of the viewers, they are joining right now. So we started this particular process from the entire process of communication and the share of listening particular process in speaking as well as in writing, reading, and then listening, that we have covered. After that, we covered difference between hearing and listening. Then we covered the listening styles, that means the passive listening as well as the active listening. Then we covered the levels of listening. We started it from the first ladder, the complete ignorance. After the second ladders, that pretending you are listening. Then the third ladder we covered, that was selective listening. After that, we covered attentive listening as well as active listening. And after that, we covered the ladder, the fifth level, empathetic listening. Then we covered barriers to listening. So that's it from my side, and I really thank you all for joining this particular session. Now I want to give some answers to the queries in the rest 3 to 4 minutes. So yes, Vijay, you are absolutely right. Again, the same question, it was asked, I think, earlier by Partha Basu, that definitely we ask questions when we are listening, but please wait for your turn. Let that particular speaker continue the process, and when the particular conversation is over by the speaker, then ask the question. Yes, Ajitwa Mukherjee has asked a very beautiful question, that in many government organizations where there is a requirement of public dealing, the concerned person who deals does not respond properly to public, which is important. Can we call it barrier of listening? Well, in this particular, you have asked a very beautiful question. But here, if that particular person is not responding you well, so that means he is again having the preconceived notion in his mind. Again, it's a barrier of listening. Absolutely. Now, Pooja Sahi, God gave us one mouth and two ears. Thus, we should listen twice as much as we talk. Well, if you, really consider my advice, then I always try my level best to listen more. And the day I have adopted this particular habit, Pooja, to be very honest and to be very frank with you, again, the positivity has started coming in my mind. So of course we should listen more, because already I have shared the process of communication in which the share of listening is actually 47%. So definitely we should listen more. Yeah, thank you Paras ji, Mithu Chatterjee. Okay, thank you Mithu. So after that, okay, again, there is a question by Mangesh Pornerkar, that is, hi, before asking a question, shall we try to ask ourselves to get answer? Well, again, it's a process of preconceived notion. Please don't preassume anything, to be very honest and to be very frank with you, Mangesh ji. Try to listen actually what the intent of that particular speaker is. Then ask a question. So if I will have again a preconceived question in my mind, suppose the conversation is going on between me and you, and I have started getting a preconceived notion in my mind, already an answer of whatever you are asking, whatever you are saying. So the intent of this particular listening will get into vain. It can be a barrier to that particular listening process. So never ask yourself to get the answer. That particular person will give you the answer. Wait for your turn and then just ask your question. Mukesh Rai, thank you sir. Thank you sir. Thank you very much. So that's it from my side. I have given the answers of your queries too. So again, I'm Paras Narula. We represent training department at Safe Express Private Limited. So again, if you have some other topics that you want to be delivered by us, please feel free to share your concerns with us. We will happy to give that particular answers to your queries. So that's it from my side, and stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sandeep Jan. Thank you very much. Thank you.